It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and we're in a holosuite. Bashir's showing most of the main cast around the new program he's got, specifically to introduce the main character, Vic Fontaine. Except he's not Vic Fontaine, as he's been adopted by a patron of the channel, and will now be known as Victor Cheese Fountain, aka Mr. Cheese, by order of Admiral Sam Vimes. The reason Bashir wants everybody to meet Victor Cheese Fountain is because Victor isn't your average hologram. For a start, he's aware of the fact that he's a simulation. For another, he's very good at observing behaviour, which is how he can tell Worf and Dax are married, O'Brien misses his missus, and there's something screwy between Odo and Kira. Back in the bar, they're all arranging to visit the holosuite tomorrow and spend some time in Victor's lounge. All except Kira, that is, and Dax lets slip that she's off to visit ex-boyfriend Shakar on Bajor, much to the poorly disguised upset of Odo. At least Bashir's luckier in love. He's dating someone new, and all thanks to some coaching from Victor Cheese Fountain, news that's overheard by Odo. It spawns an idea in his head, and after some banter with Quark later, he asks to borrow Bashir's new program. It's after hours, and Mr. Cheese is reminiscing about fictional old times, but Odo's more interested in how he knew what he knew about Dax and Worf, or O'Brien, or he and Kira. Victor says it's pretty obvious what Odo thinks about her, and that she's not in the same place. Odo says it's because she prefers Shakar, but Victor waves that away. Odo's problem isn't competition, it's how big the stick up his arse is. Despite the way it sounds, this is actually good news. The issue being him means it's also an issue he has control over. Something with a bit more style than his current outfit is a good start, and an easy change for him. The next step is getting a little experience with being something other than a stony-faced git, and Victor thinks having him fake playing the piano during a song will give him a taste of how that feels. A bit of an awkward start gives way to Odo getting into it, and he's enjoying himself by the time the song ends. The mood abates somewhat when he's with Victor afterwards. This is still all vaguely embarrassing to him, and he starts to feel awkward again, so Victor tells him to sit down and relax. Besides, he's arranged a little company. One of Victor's guests is very taken with Odo. Of course, Odo understands the whole point of this intervention was for her to be very taken with him. He tries to decline the date, but Victor explains that if he's going to work out the kinks, he needs experience. Something in Victor Cheese Fountain's mentoring clearly struck a chord, quite literally in fact, as Odo starts singing when he's in Sisko's office to deliver something. He stops when Sisko joins in, surprised to learn what he was doing, then decides to start up again, and the two of them have a little low-key sing-along. Elsewhere, Bashir and Dax are gossiping. They want to know what the deal is with Kira and Shakar, not least of which because Kira has extended her stay for a couple more days. That causes Dax to lament the effect on Odo, and Bashir to not know what the bloody hell she's talking about, because it's supposed to be a secret. Odo seems to be lamenting as well. He's with Victor Cheese Fountain again, and concerned that they've not talked about the Kira and Shakar business. Victor again says Shakar has nothing to do with things, and unveils a little surprise for Odo. There's a new singer in the lounge, and she looks a lot like a certain Bajoran ex-resistance fighter. Some drinks after they've finished their set are an excuse for Victor to get Odo and Holo Kira together, then make his excuses and bugger off. Everything's going swimmingly, and with conversation along very similar lines to his previous holographic date. Perhaps it's this which makes Odo call a halt to proceedings and summon Vic back. This isn't Kira. It isn't even nearly Kira. It's someone else in a Kira suit, and that just isn't working for him. None of this is going to give him confidence with the real thing. He thanks Victor for all he's done, but says he's had his fill, and leaves. Kira's back from Bajor. Trying to strike up a conversation with Odo goes nowhere when he acts awkwardly around her, then excuses himself to return to work. She pops into Quark's instead and uses a holosuite for meditation. Maybe she fancied a change from the temple just across the promenade, or the shrine in her own quarters, but the decision is a handy one, as it means Victor Cheese Fountain can pop in and have a chat. Knowing that he's a hologram has apparently given Victor the power to nip between programs currently in use, hence him sneaking over here during a break. The reason? To sing the praises of Odo and how he feels about Kira. The idea of Odo spending extended periods in a holosuite comes as something of a surprise to Kira, so perhaps it's that, and realizing Victor's not going to bugger off until she says yes, that makes her agree to have dinner with Odo tonight. It's not just holosuites Victor can fiddle with either, as he's making a call to Odo. He's upgraded the Holo Kira character in his program, he says, and thinks Odo should give it another try. Odo's a little suspicious from the sounds of things, but Victor doesn't give him enough chance to decline. Dinner time comes, and both Kira and Odo are a little awkward about the whole thing. Odo's quicker to recover than her, though, likely because he thinks this is just another trial run. That confidence lets him be the one to lead, and to open up about his work being a substitute for having little else in his life. Victor starts to sing, and as Kira's not hungry, Odo instead invites her to dance. It's a surprising success, Odo having learned how in here, and that turns the conversation to their first date being a bit weird in a holosuite when Kira knows some other quiet places that they could have had dinner instead. Him trying to explain why that's not an option coincides with Victor finishing his song, so Odo calls him over to explain to Kira that she's a hologram. Which, of course, is the point where he has to hold up his hands and tell Odo the truth. Odo's mortified, obviously, and deaf to Victor's explanation that this is what he wanted. He promptly scarpers. Victor Cheese Fountain is trying to call Odo and explain. Odo's disinclined to listen, as he's the poor bugger who has to live with the aftermath of Victor's cocking about. Kira, on the other hand, has had an epiphany. Dax assumes it's because of her visit to Shakar, but Kira says that's not the case. Regardless, Dax tells her that such moments are exceedingly rare and should be listened to, which is why Kira catches up with Odo when she sees him. He's brusque with her and wants to forget about the whole thing, reluctantly agreeing to talk later in his office when she insists. She'd rather talk about it over dinner, though, and Odo's questions about Shakar are met with the news that her visit to Bajor was business only. The awkwardness has become a little confrontational at this point, with Odo asking how she expects the dinner to progress. Much the same as in a holosuite, she thinks, dancing potentially leading to kissing, so Odo says they should cut out all the faffing around and go straight to that. Not exactly the most romantic situation, but that doesn't stop half the inhabitants of the station from having a good ogle while Kira and Odo mash faces. Mr. Cheese is finishing up a song when Odo visits his lounge. Bashir's already updated Victor on developments, though Odo wanted to come and thank him personally. It's a flying visit only, as Odo has other places to be, but he agrees to Victor's request to keep the program running for a while, so we'll leave our holographic Cupid to exercise his pipes until the next adventure. And with that, it's finally over. The long hinted at, briefly engaged with, and swiftly sidetracked shipping of Odo and Kira has finally decided to get on with it. I'll grant you that's somewhat of an oversimplification, of course. The real story is of Odo and either him coming out of his shell or being reformed into something more socially acceptable, depending on how you want to read things. We'll take the generous interpretation ourselves, I think, as there's no overtone of "this isn't me, but I'll pretend while it's useful." He does clearly enjoy himself once he's prompted into it, and the honesty he shows when discussing how he's used work as padding to fill the void is not just a line tossed out for effect. These are things he's been curious to try, inner truths he's wanted to share, but simply hadn't had someone who he trusts enough to do so. Which is ironic in a way, as the character he does trust, Victor Cheese Fountain, gives him something he wanted by essentially betraying that trust. Unmasking the core of Odo is something he'd not have done if he'd known he was bearing it for real, at least not without significant patience and hardship, so tearing off the plaster was a shortcut to that end result. We could probably have a discussion over whether the longer route might have resulted in a stronger and more understanding bond between Odo and Kira, and that such a shortcut may have robbed them of figuring it out for themselves, but a 45-minute TV series is hardly conducive to such soul-searching, so we should bear those constraints in mind. Regardless, it ends with two of the show's most defensive people lowering those barriers to each other, and the result is about as good as you could have hoped for, given that neither of the actors involved thought this was the right choice. Both René Auberjonois and Nana Visitor thought remaining friends was the way to go, but were overruled. To be clear, that's not intended to be a backhanded compliment, as they both put themselves into the role, but it does raise an interesting question about how actors reconcile the way they view their characters against how those characters are written, especially with plot points that have long-lasting repercussions for multiple people. Let's look at the other big thing for this episode then, namely the introduction of a new recurring character. Victor Cheese Fountain is the end result of an idea those behind the scenes had been bandying around for multiple seasons, with a number of different people eyed for the role. It's a fair idea on paper. Stories can benefit from having someone to act as part sounding board, part advisor, and part confidant. Deanna and Guinan did the job for TNG, and Neelix for Voyager. Providing one for Deep Space Nine thus serves a purpose, and making them a holoprogram character means we don't have to explain why they're not around when the story doesn't need them. Despite this, he also comes with the curious choice of being self-aware. Whilst I do wonder if that choice was in any way influenced by how well viewers received the Doctor on Voyager, I can certainly see why it's much more useful to have him that way. A character who was themselves a character in-universe would need a layer of obfuscation when dealing with anything not part of their program, the use of metaphors and hypotheticals whenever somebody's trying to explain a 24th century problem to them. We saw the exact issue that would cause in this episode, when Holokira was confused by the whole concept of holograms. Having him aware of all the stuff going on outside his suite neatly removes the need to work around this every time we call on him, while still retaining all the benefits. Let's end with the topic we've mentioned before, and have another chat about using someone's likeness in a holoprogram. Most people seem to be okay with the idea, as we've seen others viewing it as pretty harmless fantasy. But we also saw in a previous story that Kira was very opposed to her likeness being used, and Odo was right there with her when it happened. As a result, I confess I'm a little disappointed neither of them called it out here, Kira for obvious reasons and Odo because of his ethics. That being said, I'll grant you the premise of a hologram switcheroo was central to the story, so there's not a lot you could do about it beyond rewriting the whole thing. Perhaps we should instead chalk it up as another example of perfect being the enemy of done. End of episode.
Why'd they even call it login in the first place?
Is it just me, or does this guy sound a bit,
Why are they even giving cats cheeseburgers in the first place? That's animal cruelty.
Out of his tree?
diplomatically put?
I mean, you've got a point, but he's also the only person we've come across in this whole place. Except the buzzards, obviously, but they were dickheads. That makes him the best chance we've got for figuring out what to do next.
Badgers and snakes I can understand, but why the mushrooms?
Call me a pessimist, but I'm not 100% convinced he'll be a reliable source of accurate data.
Look, you're assuming he's going to be a problem when we don't know that for certain. Maybe it's all the time I've spent around Starfleet rubbing off on me, but I think we should give the lad a chance for reasonable, rational communication.
I'll give you a break, you goddamn son of a bitch.
And if he tries anything?
I'll go for his balls and you tear his throat out. Whoa.
Reviews of old TV shows? Who the hell's gonna watch that trash?